Howland, darling viewers, it's Jen here at Check Her Joy. Today I am reviewing A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. This is the second book in the Carl's duology. Book 1 is an absolutely remarkable thing. These are both science fiction. They're like new adult, kind of YA, but also kind of adult books. They center around the main character of April May, who discovers this robot statue in the middle of New York, and then she goes about trying to figure out what it is, because it has some really strange qualities, which ends up making her famous and wrapping her up in all this, like, internet fame, and there's, like, mysteries to solve, and they're fun and quirky and interesting, but also, like, they can get pretty deep. I've already reviewed book 1 if you want to go listen to that. I also don't recommend reading these out of order. Definitely read book 1 first. Go get An Absolutely Remarkable Thing first. Hank's channel also did a recap of book 1, which is totally spoilery for book 1. But if you're going into book 2 not having read book 1 in a while, like I did, I haven't reread this year. Super recommend. It was incredibly helpful to kind of refresh everything that happened to April. So much happened to April. So the rest of this is going to contain spoilers for book 1. That's it. There's your warning. I'm going to try to keep it spoiler free for book 2 though. We'll see how it goes. My notes right now, so much happens in this book that my notes are just literally just words. And maybe I'll get to all of it and maybe I won't. Let's see. I also listened to part of this, actually most of it, as the audiobook because the holds came in for both of them at the same time and I went with it. The audiobook has like 5 different narrators or something, so I'm going to put those names down in the description below rather than reading all of them off. Also, the main change between book 2 and book 1 is that we are introducing several different narrating points. In book 1, it's just April telling us her story. In book 2, we get her friends Andy and Maya and Miranda, and April narrates part of it, and so does Carl. So if you want all of their different perspectives, it's totally happening. I loved it. I also loved having the audiobook and having them each be distinct different voices so I could tell them apart. The physical book does tell you at the beginning of each chapter who's narrating, and so does the audiobook too. So it wasn't too hard to keep track of them. The book's also told through several different formats, so like some of it is emails, or at least one section is the transcript of a YouTube video and the transcript of a podcast. So we're not just dealing with novel format, although most of it is. There's also other ways of telling the story being wrapped into this, which I feel like was also consistent with book 1, although it's been a while, so I'm not sure. So book 1 ended with April ending up in a warehouse and us thinking that she almost died, but there's also a teaser at the end of the book where Andy gets this text message from April's phone saying knock knock, and then we're left with like, what's behind the door? So book 2 literally starts off in that exact same space with Andy going to see what's behind the door, and that takes us off on our adventure. Most of this book is taking place 6 months after the end of book 1, so there's like this gap of like post-April period where the Carls have vanished, April's vanished, and the world has kind of started moving on without them, and regrouping and processing, because like the Carls created this dream space where all of humanity was involved, so nobody could really ignore them. So it completely changed the world a little bit, but also this is the world trying to get back to normal, whatever normal is for them. But we do have these main characters who are very much influenced by April and are grieving April. So like the rest of the world has their own views on missing April, but then we're dealing with Andy, Maya, and Miranda, also very much dealing with this loss. Andy's still doing podcasts and living with his roommate Jason, and he's coming from it from that perspective. Miranda is the scientist, and she goes back to her doctoral program and doing her research that she was working on before. And then Maya goes back to her life, which, as far as I can remember, is mostly her parents and living alone without April. And I can't remember if she had a job before she gets swept back up in like things, and the rest of your life kind of falls to the wayside when you're in April's and the Carls orbits. So there's more mystery. The stakes get higher in this, but we're also exploring more more about the world too. Like, Hank Green uses this as an allegory to explain the internet and interpersonal connections, and that continues on. But we're also looking at businesses and capitalism and economics and money, and scientific advancement, and how fast is too fast, and how far should we go, and what is morally right and not right. And there's like this grand good versus evil battle also happening. The entire fate of the human race is hanging in the balance, and like our futures. And it's just like so many different things happening. It's hard to explain, especially when I'm not like spoiling stuff. Oh my goodness. There's also plenty of quirky things happening in here and kind of magical things. You've got like, we find out more about the Curls. They're literally chapters narrated by the Curls, or Carl, as they just start calling it, as one being. It goes from being a bunch of Carls to just like we're interacting with one face. So we find out more about Carl and where Carl came from. Carl's also got this they them pronoun going on there, where like they don't have a physical body like we do, so they don't have gender the way we do, so they're just a them, which was cool. So we get to find out more about Carl, where Carl came from, what Carl is thinking even as Carl's narrating, and processing, and why Carl is doing what Carl's doing, which I loved. But it also still leaves some questions. Like, we don't fully find out everything about Carl, which is also good, considering how, I don't know, omniscient Carl is, and everywhere, and like advanced beyond us. The main part about this book, and also what worked in the first book too, is that we are still continuing these friends and these characters that have met, and their journey, and how they're processing things, but also how they're interacting with each other. We're looking at how Andy feels about April. I mean, especially with April dying. In book 1, we are dealing with how Andy and Maya and Miranda are all processing that, and how the rest of the world is processing it. We see Robin again, even though he's not narrating in this. And so we get more, there's more characters also coming in. Miranda and Andy, they all know other people. And so we're introducing new characters. And yes, we get to see what Peter Petrovic has been up to also. And a little bit about the Defenders, like that group that was responsible for April's death. We get to kind of find out what happened to them and how they've evolved and become something different. And there's tons of things in here where we're introduced to new characters and we're never quite sure who we can trust and not trust too. Yeah, a lot of this book is like also not knowing other people's motives, and like humans can be great and brilliant and amazing, but also we can be awful and horrible, especially to each other. And so this book kind of plays with that and doesn't gloss it over. But on the whole, it's also a very hopeful book. Like, the future can be better, and if we work together, we can do really amazing, great things. So basically, if you like book 1, check out book 2. It's more of the same, but also like amping everything up a few notches and going deeper into stuff and exploring more characters. I ended up giving both these books 4 stars. And it's hard to say which one I liked more because I didn't read them back to back. So I have fond memories of book 1 and April and like this new adventure where I didn't know what was going to happen. But then I've had a year to think about what I thought the Carls were and what happened to April. And so like my brain went through so many different possibilities that like I don't think anything that could have happened in this book would have truly surprised me in the same way that book 1, where I didn't know anything, was or would have. It feels like the same characters. They also have a lot of they also have some development, especially Andy goes through massive developments in this book. I kind of feel like this book is the perfect metaphor for what 2020 is also. Like, it feels very much a part of this moment and like living through the pandemic, but also all the other news that is also happening around us at the same time, where we are connecting to each other more and more through the internet and rather than in person. And even when we are in person, like, things are changed. And I feel like that felt, I don't know if it was just the lens I was reading this through, but also like it feels connected to this book. And this book gets into things like pandemics and like Maya's Black, so we're talking about race relations. That's a very much part of this book. We're talking about the economy, and all of that feels very relevant to what is happening in the news right now, so it felt like it's very much a product of our times. And there's also plenty of references to things like Justin Bieber and K-pop and like today's culture and the internet and the websites we're using and Twitter and YouTube and TikTok, and so that also feels like it's very much now. I'm not sure how old this book is going to hold up in like 10 years or 20 years. Like, that'll be interesting. But for like 2020, it feels like it perfectly captures now. So there's my review for A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. Peace out. I love you guys and keep reading. Bye.